thanks everyone for joining us. Taylor's here to talk with us about understanding Bay Area microclimates. Um, this is a really good thing to know because there is so many microclimates and it's really important for your overall success in your garden. Taylor, thanks so much for your time and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Jen. All right, I am really excited about this one. It's a type of class I've taught before. I really like talking about microclimates and talking about plants in general. So this is a fun one. It's going to be mainly and all about outdoor plants. So it's filling your gardens with amazing stuff, but also talking about the environment around you on many different scales and how that can affect what you're thinking about when you are going to these nurseries or going to these places where you're picking up plants to actually make really good choices. For the plants that you want, both aesthetically, for the health of your garden, for the maybe if you want to go for some sort of aspect or some sort of look, as well as making sure the plants are really successful and you have a really nice time with it. So we have lots to talk about. I really appreciate everyone who's joining us today live. If you have any questions, definitely bring them into us. I'm happy to answer them at different points during the lecture, maybe partway through, and definitely at the very end, we'll go through some questions. So if you are watching this live, thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching this later on our YouTube page, I appreciate you very much as well. Check all of our other content and go to our website, slowgardens.com, and it has all of our information. We just revamped the whole website. It looks beautiful and there's lots of information on there. So come join us for some of our other classes and see what other events are going on. But today we're talking about understanding the Bay Area microclimate. So I'm a Bay Area boy. I've lived here my whole life, and I work at a store that is right in the middle of the Bay Area, right here in San Francisco. And so there are many of our slopes all around this area. So I'm sure many of us are people who grow up or have been or are growing plants in the Bay Area. So let's talk about just the different areas around here and then choose some plants for that. First thing I like to just talk about is a little bit more about my horticultural journey, just to give you a little bit of a background of who I am and where the information is coming from, just so you can have a little bit of context for it. Just quickly going in, I'm a UCSC graduate, so I went to Santa Cruz. I got a plant science degree, so I really liked plants. I started out not sure what I wanted to do. I knew I liked biology, fell in love with plant science, and so I got to go there and build my passion, learn all about the little molecular parts and all the science about it. But honestly, I didn't really learn very much about actually growing plants until I came to Slow Garden Center, which has been an amazing experience. I've been here for many, many years. I'm right now the assistant manager at one of our main stores, the one in San Francisco on Slow Boulevard. I'm also the nursery buyer. So that's really where this class is coming from, is I am the one who is purchasing many, many of our large and more outdoor plants for our store. And so I'm constantly thinking about what do we want to bring in? What do people want to actually grow? What are good plans for different seasons? So that's definitely going through my mind every day at work. I love talking to people about that and kind of building up more and more of my knowledge to help serve the community even better. And I wanted to really distill that into a nice little seminar and little talk for everyone who is interested. So I have it in one place and we can actually really talk about it. We also do a lot of stuff at our stores. We were talking about it a little bit earlier, but we have seminars, we have workshops, we have planting parties, we have kids events, all these different kinds of things, wellness fairs and stuff. So definitely if you have a knowledge, if you have a want for knowledge of plant stuff, come into all of our stores. We have a lot to talk about, and we just love talking to you. So it could be a nice time, especially right now. It's spring's happening and flowers are all around. So that's where I built my horticultural journey. Let's move on to a little bit more of the science. I know we're going to talk about plants really soon, but let's get through this topic really fast because it's an important one that especially confuses many people. I have this question all the time. There's a lot of information on all the cans that we have at our store. All the different plants that we sell have their name, all their scientific names. It has different kinds of information on the lighting that they need and the zone or the size that they're growing. But the zone is actually the number. So a lot of times people see a number on a can and it'll be somewhere where it's like, this is a zone 8 to 10, or this is a zone 17, or this is for zone or for number 8 or number 9B or whatever it is. And sometimes that confuses people because they're like, well, what does this number actually mean? And a lot of times I have to explain that it's actually two different categories. There is the USDA plant hardiness zone, which is usually the lower numbers. Generally, we see them between 5 to 10 or so. That's kind of where most of us and most of our plants will be sitting. And the main thing about it is it's designed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So it's a government helped program where it is the minimum temperature that the plant can survive at or should be surviving at. And so the interesting thing about this number is it doesn't tell you a lot more about the plant other than just the minimum temperature, which is very important because cold freezes or just really low temperatures is a very harsh thing for a plant. And if a plant can't survive in lower than 30 degrees or can't survive in lower than 20 degrees, it's really important to know, especially if you're in areas that do get a little bit more of a frost, if you live a little bit more in the mountains or a little bit farther away from maybe our coastal area. But the areas that we have in the Bay Area regions around all of our slope garden stores, which is most of our clientele, although not all of them, is the 9B, the 10A, and the 10B. And so we're right at the very top of the list. It starts at 1 or so, and it goes to about 11. And that just means that we are in an area that doesn't get as cold. We don't get those frost periods. We don't get a snow every once in a while. So it is like 10B is kind of actually where most of San Francisco sits in. It's around 35 to 40 degrees is our lowest temperature. We have some 10A parts. Some of the Marin areas and stuff have 9B parts where they get a little bit colder during the winter, but they also get a little bit hotter. So it's not telling you anything about the max heat. It's only telling you about the minimum heat. So just kind of know where that number is coming from. If it's the hardiness zone, it's all about the temperature. And then the sunset climate zone is the whole other category that we've been using, and it's really, really helpful. It is a California thing. It is developed by the Sunset Magazine, working with another U.S. Government agency, and it's actually a lot more. It's a little bit more nuanced. There's a lot more that it's trying to tell you. It's talking about precipitation, wind, humidity, growing season length, winters, summer highs, summer winter lows, all those kinds of information. So a lot of it's a little bit more distilled into understanding the zones and the areas within the California regions, especially around here in the Bay Area. I have a picture right here on the side that has the main areas and regions where these zones kind of hit. So you can see Sunset Climate Zone 17 is the one that I know and I am in the most because it is all of San Francisco and most of the coastal regions here around this area. And it has a description of temperature areas are located on the coast, winters are mild, wet, almost frostless, summers are cool with frequent fog. That sounds like San Francisco if I could read anything. So those are the areas that we do get this kind of cooler weather. Our summers are not blazing hot. We do get these amazing fog periods because the inland gets a lot hotter and pulls the fog from the bay right into our coastal areas. So that's where the Sunset Climate Zone 17 comes from. And there's a couple other ones. If you're a little bit more in, if you're towards the Mill Valley, you're probably in a 16 or a 15, or sometimes you might even be in a 14 if you're a little bit farther inland. And that just is describing different kinds of things that are about the temperature or the weather in the winter, weather in the summer, and stuff like that. All this information is in the Sunset Western Garden books or on their app or anything like that. It is a huge, wide, and very helpful culmination of research and information about our area here in California. So if you want to know anything about plants and a lot of information, the Sunset Western Garden book and all that stuff that they have is a really good resource for that. But I also wanted to kind of get to the point across that these are all really great guidelines, but they're not actual set rules. Plants are varied. They can adapt to different areas. Sometimes if you have a plant that's a little bit under your hardiness zone, that just means that it can take a little bit of a cooler weather. It might be okay. But if it's a plant that really needs a low hardiness zone, that means it needs that low temperature. It needs that cold period during the winter. So there's a lot of variety as well as the environment is changing. We all know that the climate is moving and shifting and changing a lot these days. And actually these numbers are shifting throughout the year. So we've been moving higher up on the numbers in the past many years. If you see like a trend, if you're looking back in history, but just give me information. That's what the numbers mean on the cans. It gives you a little bit of a starting point, but let's talk a little bit more specifically. And let's actually really talk about the concept of a microclimate, which is what this class is about. And it's a really cool word that describes a lot. And I think everyone who's listening to this or watching this, if you think of the word microclimate in your head and you try and talk to someone else about it, you probably have a slightly different description for it. You'd have a maybe different idea of what it really means to you because it is a very relative word. It's something that is micro, meaning small, climate, meaning the environment around you. And so if you have like the very top of this, I have this little triangle here to kind of get the point across. If you're thinking about the world in general, a state is a microclimate. It's a small part of the world, of course, that has its own kind of climate going around. There's different seasons. We know, like in California, although it is the largest, one of the largest states, we are a huge, vast region. It's really hard to call it a microclimate, but in the vast scheme of things, it is a microclimate to the world. Um, but it is a large region that has a lot going on. So it's really hard to say, hey, this grows in California no matter what. You can't, it's very hard to say a plant will do that because there's so many regions throughout this area, so many microclimates within it. There are sunset zones that we just talked about, which is really nice large regions that are a little bit more sprawling, really based around topographic features. So coastal areas, a little bit more inland, rockier areas, or areas that are in valleys or in the hills. Those are all the sunset garden zones that have been defined, and they're a really good way of understanding another microclimate that has a microclimate to the state. And then even within those zones, right now I was talking about how San Francisco is 17, and across the bay, a little bit farther in, like maybe El Cerrito or even just under Marin, it's all the same number, but they're different counties and they have different plants that grow there. And everyone has a slightly different feel. If you go and drive through these different regions and these different counties, you really see a vast variety of plants doing better than in certain areas than other areas, but you actually might see the same kind of plant in a lot of those areas as well. Um, Cities are a really easy way to talk about. So we can say, hey, San Francisco, you can grow this. Hey, in Marin, you can grow, or in Mill Valley, you can grow this. In Kentfield, you might want to grow this kind of plant. A lot of crossover there, of course. But you can talk about cities as another kind of microclimate kind of idea. But the past two or three of them have really been defined by borders. It's not defined by plant care or plant growth areas. A city is not defined by how well a poppy will grow or something like that. It is defined by city borders, and so it's actually not the best idea for really understanding what will grow because it's not a metric that's talking about plants. It's talking about people and all the other kinds of regulations and stuff. Neighborhoods is a really good one to think about because there are lots of neighborhoods throughout all of our areas that have very different kinds of um, growth capabilities. I'm actually in my next slide going to talk a lot about San Francisco neighborhoods, so we can go into that. And lastly, your backyard. That is your planting space. That is your microclimate. So if you're talking to someone about plants or you want to go into a garden center and give them a little bit of information about your microclimate, that's your backyard or your front yard or wherever your planting space is. And then when you can start there and start talking about what actually space you have, you can build out a nice plant catalog that you can bring into that area and grow really well. So let's really fast talk about the microclimates within the city of San Francisco, because that's where I live. That's what I know. And that's something I can talk about, especially because San Francisco is dense. We are topographically very dense. We have a lot of people. We have a lot of hills and short areas, and we have parks everywhere and all these different things that are actually shifting around the climate around themselves. You know, Golden Gate Park is this long strip, but it's all full of these tall trees. So it really does buffer some stuff, and it does change the climate inside it. There is all the hills in the middle of the city around Diamond Heights and Twin Peaks and all those different areas. They stop the wind from coming in. If you are at the Sunset area, so right in here in this little Sunset zone, which is where the Slope Garden Center that I work at Slope Boulevard is located, we have the heavy fogs. We have fog, we have heavy winds. Everything gets pulled in from the coast and it fills in that area. So we get a lot cooler days. We get a lot more foggier days. We have to worry about salt air a lot more. But then it hits the middle of the city where there's a lot more hills and there's a lot more trees and there's a lot more buffers and barriers. And then on the same exact day that we can have a very cold, very foggy, although nice, I do like it, I live here, but that kind of day here in the Sunset area by the Intermission or Potrero Hill or anywhere down by Dolores Park is sunny and blazing and beautiful. And it's in the same region. We're only a couple miles apart and we're in the same city, but the vast different microclimate can actually affect it. And so there are a lot of plants that we talk about in our store that when people come in and I go, yes, you can grow this probably throughout the whole city, but it'll grow way better if you live in the Mission District. You grow way better if you have a lot more heat for that fruit to kind of to ripen compared to maybe by the coast where yes, the plant will grow and it will look great and it will flower and it'll fruit, but you maybe won't get the same kind of yield out of it. So there's a lot of those kinds of conversations happening in our stores. So it's definitely a good one to think about. Where's your neighborhood? Where are you located? What are the barriers that are around you? What are the physical things that are actually affecting your climate? And then build your garden based on maybe some of those things. If you have hills, you have things in the way, all that stuff. Right here is pretty much talking about what I was going into. It's analyzing your planting space. So the first thing you should do, I've mentioned many times, when you're coming into a store or you're looking to plan your garden or develop a planting arrangement or whatever it is just think about your environment around you. So the main ones are sun exposure. That's your top one. Where is the sun coming from? What direction is it coming from? How hot it is? What is it getting blocked by? Sun exposure is huge for plant growth. It really defines and splits a lot of plants out. So there's some areas that are more shadier plants or some for sunnier plants. All that stuff is a big category. Wind pressure is really important and something that people don't think about too much. And I have a slide later on that's going to talk a lot about what wind pressure can actually do and why you have to think about it. If you're in the sunset region where I was talking about in the lower sunset or something like that, you have a lot of wind coming in from the ocean. But if you have somewhere maybe you're on the other right on the other side of the hills and you don't get a lot of wind pressure coming in into your garden, or your house is in the right direction where it's blocking some stuff, it's something you have to think about the difference between those. Physical barriers are all about, you got rocks in your garden, you got trees, you got houses, all the different things that are going to just physically, block the spacing in your area, especially if you're trying to plant in maybe your sidewalks or something like that. Think about the space that's actually being given to you and what the plant can actually grow into. If you're trying to plant in containers or pots, that's your physical barrier. You can't grow outside of a pot when the pot is all your dirt. So it's definitely thinking about how much space you have and where the roots will grow and where the plant will grow and where the branches will grow. Water availability is a lot of what we control. So we are able to give our plants water, especially if they're in containers or if we're irrigating our gardens, but also where the rain is coming from. And it kind of goes into the last one, incline and elevation. If you have a lot of incline going into your, or elevation, no, if you have an incline going into your garden and you have rain coming in and it's washing down those hills or whatever it is into your garden, you have a lot more water availability. Or if parts of your garden are a lot more soggier because they're the lowest part of the garden, think about those areas as your high water zones, or if areas are on a hill or a mound or something like that, and you know that it dries out really fast, that's your lower water zones, and maybe just your plant picks for those kinds of areas. Soil space and quantity is similar to the physical barriers. How much soil space do you have, as well as the quality of it? Like, what is actually in your soil? Do you have the silt? Do you have the clay? Are you in sand? All those kinds of things are really important to think about, but also easily, not super easily, but you can amend them and you can change them. And those are something that you can actually work with, compared to sun exposure is really hard to change because the sun's there and your house is there. So all these things, think about when you're analyzing your space. Okay. So we talked a lot about a lot of different kinds of things and a lot of ways that we can think about your microclimate and how it's different from large scale to small scale. We really want to think about our gardens at this point. We want to think about what we can bring in. And let's talk about some plants. I have this really nice, pretty slide here, a lot of different plants on it. I'm going to take a quick drink of my tea. Is there possibly any questions coming up, Jen? Anything like that?
Well, this is all great, and really good visuals. I did want to say, I think, when you see, I think sometimes people can focus on the numbers, like the zones and stuff that they're in. Um, and it's really like Taylor's saying, like, I'd say that it's really important to just convey that your backyard is the ultimate microclimate. So like you can look at a book and it'll say like you're in this zone or whatever, but it might not work in your backyard because of whatever reason. And so not to get frustrated with that, just that's like a learning point basically for you. And we all, I mean, that's just a function of being in the Bay Area and having these zones. We just have to learn our own unique environment. So
Yeah. No, definitely. I really like to talk about that point, especially with people who see these numbers, like you're saying, and are nervous about growing a plant, or they don't want to try it because they don't want to fail. And gardening is all about trying your best and working with your environment, and failing is part of that. And even every mistake or every plant that kind of withers away or dies away even is a lesson for you, and knowing that maybe that plant is not the right choice, or maybe there's some sort of something happened that maybe caused that. All these things are adding to your knowledge, making you a better gardener. Everyone in our stores who gardens, everyone who comes in who's been an avid gardener for many years, has dealt with issues and has lost plants and has had great successes and great failures. And that just makes you a better person as a gardener. So don't be afraid to try something out. Maybe we won't recommend putting a plant in that location, but if you want to really try it and you really love that plant, give it a try. Sometimes your little microclimate can just sustain it enough that it actually does really, really well. And that's kind of the fun part. So everything in these pictures right here, these are all my pictures. Pretty much every picture actually in this whole webinar is something that I've taken either from my garden or from our store or maybe a park nearby me. So they're all ones in our area. There's not just random pictures from offline. They're physical plants that I've seen and I've seen grow and I've seen flower and bloom. So definitely know that there's a lot of stuff that we are talking about that are so available to you. They're here. They're ready for you to be planting. All these ones in these pictures right here are actually not ones we're going to be talking about today, but there's some beautiful ones. They're some of my favorites. If I do this class again, I might choose them as my next plants category. So if you're interested in some of these ones on this page or you want me to do another one of these, let us know. But let's start with one of my favorites, and one of the ones that really shows it's a beautiful statement plant for your garden. We have many of them in our stores right now. They're actually blooming. It's right now in February, late February right now in the city, and they're blooming like crazy. So if you are interested in a camellia, it is a great time of the year to pick one up. You can really see the colors. Um, but they're a plant I really want to talk about for your location. It's all about your location where you plant something because it's all about your light levels. That is really, like I said, the main thing we need to think about is where is the light coming from and how much are you getting? So Camellia japonica is this plant that I have. This is a plant in my garden. It is my great grandmother's camellia. She planted it probably 60 or so years ago, a long time ago. I'm not actually sure, but it's been growing for the whole time in my garden. It's been producing these beautiful flowers for us. My parents love it. Everyone that comes over really appreciates it. It has these beautiful glossy leaves, nice pink flowers on them. But every once in a while, there's a thing that happens where all the leaves go brown, or at least the many parts of the leaves get scorched and go brown. And it's amazing to say because this has been in my garden for so long. It's in the brightest, sunniest part of my garden. It was planted right there, smack in the middle, where it gets all the sun all day. Which is something that if I was to recommend to a guest that came to one of our stores that wants to talk to me about plants, is not what I would recommend. I wouldn't actually put it in that location, but it's been there. It's been growing there. It's been there for years. So of course it's surviving. It's doing well. But in San Francisco, there's maybe 2 or 3 days a year, a year that we get so hot that the whole thing burns. It's very beautiful the rest of the year. It has these nice glossy leaves, but we'll get that one little hot heat wave every once in a while, and the whole top of the leaves will all burn. I'll get these scorch marks that you see all over here. But the thing is, you come in, you trim that off, the tree's fine again. It actually gets a nice little prune at that point, and we keep on moving and it keeps on looking good. But it's just showing you that this was put into a location that gets a lot of sun. Of course, when it was planted, I had 40-foot, or we had 40-foot eucalyptus trees around our garden. That was planted a long time ago. There's lots of eucalyptus around here. They were just providing so much shade. So the microclimate was different when it was planted. It probably had a lot more shade. It probably was doing a lot better. A storm took out a eucalyptus because that's what eucalyptus do. They fall over sometimes. They're a little bit crazy like that. And so that was gone, and now we have that exposure. And so every year I get a little bit of a burn the plant. It's okay. I come in, I trim it, I deal with it. We work with what we have. But just letting you know that if you choose a plant for a location, it doesn't mean that it will completely fail or completely succeed, and you have to work with what's actually going on there. But another thing I wanted to talk about really quickly before we move on to our next plant is the idea of what direction your light's coming from is a little bit confusing because cardinal directions are a little bit confusing for everyone. It depends on how you can think about them. But when we say something is south facing, that is the highest or one of the highest amounts of sun, is the camellia that I have right here is on the fence on the northern side of my garden, but the fence is facing south. So a south facing fence or a south facing plant is something that is looking towards the south, which means that the sun is always hitting it. North facing is looking towards the north, which means it gets blocked by whatever's behind it, so it doesn't get as much sun. It's probably the lowest kind of light situation. East and west facing, of course, if it's east facing, it's facing, towards towards the inside of the city or wherever you are. And west facing is facing towards the ocean. So just understanding that when we say light directions, it's usually the direction that you're looking towards if you're standing in the spot, not the direction or the part of the garden that is the north side is south facing. Cool. Just a little bit of a heads up when you have that terminology or when you're trying to talk to someone about where your plant is going and what kind of light levels it's going to get. All right. So let's go into another plant that I really, really like. The Coleonema Breath of Heaven plant series is an amazing little shrub that I feel like anyone who needs a nice little plant for their garden and wants it to be very low maintenance, but the biggest impact that you can get out of it is a great one for that. There are two varieties here that I really like to talk about because the ones you see most in our stores, the Coleonema Sunset Gold and the Coleonema Pulchrum, which is the pink breath of heaven, are both wonderful plants for this situation where if you have maybe an area where you don't want to water it as often, but you have to take care of it. Everything needs water, just as a heads up. But maybe it's an area that you want a little bit more of a drought tolerant. You have a lot of wind, possibly, is the biggest plant I recommend for anyone in windier locations. But you want a little bit of nice foliage. You want it to sway in the wind. You want a little bit of flowers. It's a really beautiful option for you. The Sunset Gold is more of a ground cover, so it's this really bright, light, lemony kind of coloration to them. They have this nice yellow color. That is how they're designed. They have that coloration. And then they sprawl out and they kind of spread around. They do get a little bit of height to them, but they really just kind of spread around. They get these nice little pink flowers on them. Um, and they really kind of get to, it says, 2 feet tall, but 4 to 6 feet wide. So they really will fill your space quite nicely if you want to just have a nice little mat of light coloration throughout your garden. For the breath of heaven on the other side, the pulchrum is more upright. It is one that is, it's a lot bigger of a plant. It can go 3 to 6 feet tall, 4 to 6 feet wide. That's pretty big. 3 to 6 feet tall is pretty large. Honestly, I see them more in that 4 foot range for the most part. So, sometimes they can get taller, but this one here on the very right side is in my garden. It's been there for probably 12 to 14 years or so at this point. And it goes through different stages. It gets really green, it gets flowers on it. Sometimes it has a little bit more of the shabbier look. It is being blocked by this north facing fence. So the fence is facing north, and that fence is blocking a lot of the sun for parts of the year that's coming in to actually give the light to the plant. So only the top really has the foliage. A lot of the sides are browning and having a little more sticks. Looks okay. I have plants around it that can kind of, bulk up those areas that are a little bit more woody, but that's how you have to think about it. If you have a plant in an area that only gets light from above, that's where it's going to put all of its leaves. That's where it's going to put all of its foliage, and you might have a little bit more of a bare base to them. So that's something that this plant will do, and many other plants do that as well, lavenders and all them. So just think about, again, which direction the light's coming in. That might change how your plant looks, as well as it is an area that maybe gets a little bit extra wind, so it sways really beautifully in the wind. It does have a little bit of fragrance to it, and it can survive there really well with pretty minimal care. Um, they're also they can be irrigated if you want to like really kind of keep them nice and fresh, and if you give them a little more water, a little more fertilizer, they do stay very like vibrant and colorful. But if you let them go a little bit more, they can have a little bit more of a milder green color, but still live pretty well in our areas. Occasional pruning is great for them, but you don't really need to do too much if this is the plant, if you want to just have a nice stable plant in your garden. So the Coleonema pulchrum is amazing, and definitely one that I would check out if you have a spot in your garden that you need just a nice, stable, stationary plant. Another one that's very similar to that has a really good filling aspect that if you want to have around, maybe you have some beautiful big trees, you have some really beautiful roses or some sort of, statement plant that has a lot of color to it. And then you have, you want something to fill around it. So the Lomandra longifolia, it's another amazing one that I like to recommend to many of us who want just a nice little pop of green or a little grassy element to their garden. The cool thing about these plants is they actually do get pretty big. So when I say little, it's kind of just me talking about the plant, but 3 to 4 feet tall to 3 to 5 foot wide is a very large plant, and it is this nice grassy dome. Um, there are a couple different varieties actually in our stores. The Platinum Beauty and the Breeze are the main ones that you'll see in a lot of our stores. The Platinum Beauty is this nice, really bright, silvery, variegated foliage. It gets a little bit larger. So if you want a nice, bright coloration inside of your garden, maybe your garden's a little bit on the darker side, or you have some darker greens or something like that. You need a little pop of color, but you don't want to have to worry about flowers being your color pop. Having some nice foliage being of brightness to your garden is really nice, and it stays all year round because these are evergreen. They're actually always described as a grass. Everyone thinks about them as a grass, but they're not actually a grass. They're not in the Poaceae family, so they're not a true grass. They're evergreen perennial. So they actually will stay looking good all year round. You don't have to come in and chop them back like many other grasses. They won't dry out or die away at certain times of the year. They're going to look really full and lush and a big foliage dome all year round, and just get bigger from there. If you want to, you can trim them and prune them. The pruning is really, instead of chopping off like branches, it's really just maybe trimming a little bit of your sides, your tips of your leaves. Some of these plants can get a little bit of a brown tip, which looks actually pretty nice when it sways in the wind. But if you don't like that, you can trim them a little bit, or you can separate the bottom or cut away some of the base if you feel like it's getting a little bit too wide for you or something like that. So you can trim them and shape them, but generally they are these nice domes of foliage spreading out around them. The breeze is a little bit on the smaller side, but it's a nice green. So if you just want a nice little green patch of grasses without having to worry about it dying away or getting dried out, the Lamandras are a great option for that. Other than that, they are very salt tolerant, which is really nice here, especially in our sunset kind of region here in the San Francisco area or anywhere around the coast. So if it is a very salty, windy area, they will totally survive in those spots. They have a really good erosion control, so they're great on little coastal slopes or on areas that have a little bit more of a slope to them. So you need to have something that holds that soil because you're worried about, you know, landslides or anything like that. And there's just so many variations. Like I was saying, these are the two ones that we have in our store that are most common, but there's Arctic frost, there's a few other ones that have like really smaller aspects. You want smaller ones. So it's a pretty wide variety of family that I always like to recommend to people if you just want a nice little aspect to your garden. All right. I also wanted to point out, although I'm not going to talk about them, in this picture right here, we do have some nice birds of paradise. They're another really great one for large statement pieces for your garden. So if you need a nice sunny plant that has a really beautiful big leaf, birds of paradise are great for that. So check them out too. Um, let's move on to another plant. I hope you're all enjoying so far the pictures and the information. This is just a little slightly throwaway slide, but it's just something that I want to point out some of my favorites for the garden that are just staples and they just survive. These are the ones that will survive in your garden. So you have your Salvia leucantha midnight, which is just these the Salvia leucantha is one of those plants that will survive anything. I can't say that, but it feels like it'll survive anything. It'll be one of the last ones in your garden. If you go away for 3 years and you come back and all your plants are dying away, you might still have a salvia still there. They're pretty sturdy. They have a beautiful little soft looking little flower. The bees and the butterfly, I think mostly bees and hummingbirds probably like a lot. They have a nice little smell to them. They grow to a moderate size. And so they're a really nice one to just kind of fill in around your garden with some nice little purple and silver kind of colorations. Rosemary is my favorite. Well, I love having rosemary in my garden. I use it in my cooking all the time. I think everyone should have rosemary in their garden. That's just might be my opinion, but I think it's a great one because it can really fill a space nicely. You can trim it, you can shape it, you can eat it. It's a great one for that. It has a nice smell to it. It's pretty resistant to a lot of different kinds of pests, as well as it is fairly drought tolerant. So it does really well in a lot of our gardens, and there's lots of varieties of them. Rosemary officinalis is a lot of the more upright ones, you want a taller bush, or there's also some prostrate ones that can spread around and throw some nice flowers out. And then the Aluminum latifolium, which is the sea lavender. Not one I personally grow very often, but I see it whenever I drive to work. I drive down the coast of San Francisco to work all the time, and it's all along the coast in the sun, in the dunes of the city. So if you have very sandy soil or dry soil or poor soil, and you want some flowers, this is a great one for that. The sea lavender is really nice because it has these stalks of these really sturdy little flowers that are papery and hold their water really well and they last a long time. They make great cut flower arrangements. So if you're a cut flower person, having one of these in your garden is nice to add it to any of your bouquets. And then the leaves just can survive through so much wear and tear and salt and wind and all that stuff. So these are nice ones that just can fit the ticket if you need something to fill a spot. But let's talk really fast about another thing that we were mentioning earlier about wind damage, about wind and what that does to plants. Acer palmatums is a great species to talk about this for because I first off love these plants. I love a Japanese maple. They are so beautiful. They're one of the most gratifying plants that goes through seasons. Well, here, especially in the Bay Area, we don't have as much seasonal kind of growth around us. We aren't covered in trees along all of our sidewalks that go through all the changes of colors like many other cities, even like Sacramento or even like on the East Coast or anything where you see all the foliage go into fall. The Acer palmatum is our main plant that actually shows us fall is happening or spring is coming, and it opens up. It goes through the full seasonal kind of deciduous nature of a plant. They're also pretty smaller aspect trees, so they're a little bit on a shorter side or smaller side. They're more compact, so they can really fit in some of our more urban gardens. and they grow all over the city. They grow everywhere here. They do really, really well, but there is one thing that we always want to talk about and make sure that you know when you are planting them. They can be fairly easily damaged by excess wind, especially those saltier airs. Right here are a bunch of pictures I have of different kinds of acers that, although still quite a beautiful plant and not anywhere, it's not the plant's not dying or anything like that, it is just that the leaves of that season got blasted by a lot of wind during a time where they were a little bit tender. And so the edges, all the edges of the leaves get dried and crinkle up. And it's not the most sightly thing, so it's we want to try and avoid that as best we can. That's why we usually try and recommend if you're planting a Japanese maple, try and find a spot that does get a decent amount of sun and needs a little bit of good sun. It can be a little bit shaded, it's okay. But somewhere where it's not going to get hit by all the winds. Don't put it in your wind corridors or anywhere right in the front of your house where you know that the cars are driving by and the gusts of winds comes down your street. Those are the areas that you will see damage every year. The plant will keep on growing. It'll damage its leaves. It'll do what it can. It'll drop them in fall. It'll try again in spring. It'll keep on going. You're not going to lose your plant right away from that, but it is stopping it from the beauty aspect of it, as well as it doesn't get as much energy. The more leaves that dry away, the more leaves that die off quicker, the plant doesn't get as much energy. Another nice thing to know about Japanese maples are because of how they are deciduous, and this is most deciduous plants that go through a color change, the more sun and the more sun that it can take during that summer season is actually what really changes the colors of the leaves. So if you really want a nice shift from green to yellow to orange to red and have that beautiful kind of color change happen, it needs to get a good amount of sun at the right time of the year, but also not lose its leaves to wind damage or anything else like that. So that's how you can kind of keep your Japanese maple looking really beautiful. A couple other things just to mention whenever we are selling these, they like a little bit more of an acidic soil, not super necessary compared to some other plants that really need the acidity, but they like a little bit more of an acidic soil. So we have options for that in all of our stores. Again, they're deciduous. They drop their leaves with a fall color. They come in lots of sizes. They are plants that people like to bonsai. I bonsai a bunch of them down here. You know, it's still a tree, so you have to really be careful about that. But they come in lots of sizes. You can get big ones, you can get medium ones, small ones, you can get waterfall ones, you can get ground or like sprawling ones. There are lots of varieties out there that we love to like bring out to all of our stores and share with our communities around us. And I just find them very rewarding. So I'm never gonna dissuade you from a Japanese maple in general, but I'm gonna give you the idea that, or just make sure that you know that there are limitations or there are things that could affect it a little bit harshly, and that's usually wind. So now let's go really quickly to the another plant that is very similar in aspect of growth and maybe look. It has those nice colorful leaves, and they have a slightly smaller aspect to the tree growth. So if you want a space that would maybe you'd want a Japanese maple there, but you know it's blasting with wind, you know it's going to be a little bit hot, a little bit strong, or a little bit more difficult for that kind of plant. These two plants are great for that situation. They're one of my favorites as well. So Dodonea purpurea, the Dodonea viscosa purpurea, is one of those ones that is a beautiful kind of maroon colored leaf. It goes from green to maroon. It's not a deciduous plant. They're both evergreens, so there's something that will keep its leaves and it'll change its color based on how much light it's getting and the time of the year, but it's not going to completely change its color and then fall off. They will still keep their leaves on them. They can grow in ocean winds and dry desert heat, which is a huge variety of areas. So if you are here right by the coast, or if you're a lot more inland in a little hotter spot, and you need a nice little either bush or tree that can be trimmed in lots of different ways, a Dodonea is really nice for that. They can get pretty tall. You can get a standard tree and have it actually be a big kind of almost a canopy for your garden, or you can get more of these bushes and you keep it trimmed down and have a nice larger hedge with them. So they have a lot of variety there. The color is really beautiful. They even get these little kind of pinkish maroon flowers on them at different times of the year, which kind of just add to the color of the plant in general. They're not super noticeable, but they do add a nice kind of color pop to the plant. And so it's one of those ones that if you have a nice area that you want a beautiful, you know, taller, drought tolerant, easy to grow tree. So it's the first one I'll go towards. And then the Agonis flexuosa is one of the ones that I wish everyone would plant because I really do like this plant a lot. It's called the peppermint willow, and it has that name because it actually has a really sweet, nice peppermint flower scent to it. So its leaves, if you crush them a little bit, almost like a eucalyptus, you can smell the peppermint. The flowers come out, they're all little twinkly white flowers all over the nice dark, almost black foliage. It's a really striking contrast, and it has a really cool look to your garden. They have this weeping willowy look, so they have a nice trail, and they grow up and they have a nice little hang to them. They sway in the wind really well. They're fairly drought tolerant. They're fairly wind resistant. And so they're another one that if you want a more open, kind of wispier, elegant looking tree aspect to your garden, it has a nice amount of blocking for other houses. You can see here, you can still see behind them, but they do have a nice kind of barrier to them. So it's not a huge hedge that is just completely green that's blocking off something. It has a little bit more of a wavier, kind of diffused blocking or shading kind of aspect to them. So I think these are both really nice options. I think I have a Japanese maple right next to this tree as well. I have all three of these in my garden, so they're definitely good ones for different aspects and different areas. But if you want that nice kind of cool, rich color, these darker colors in your leaves, they're a good plant for you to choose. All right. So we're moving right along. We had a lot of plants to talk about and not too much time, so I hope everyone is doing very well. Here is the ceanothus, and I'm not gonna do a class about favorite plants and plants for that are growing in an area without talking about ceanothus because I think they are incredible. They are a huge variety of plants. There are so many of them within this genus that have different growth styles, different aspects. They all generally are within the blue color range of flowers, which is really beautiful and you don't get very often. So those blues to purples are really, really nice. There is one variety of the snow flurry that is a white color flower. So if you like the plants, but you want a little bit more of a white flower, there is that option. But generally they are all in that kind of blue to purple range. They can get to very different heights and different sizes. The dark star, which is this main one I'm kind of highlighting right here, is my favorite of all them. I really like it because it has these nice little small dark leaves. It has a really good branching structure. It's more of a shrub, so it's not a ground cover. It's not a tree. It's like that mid-range. You can kind of even shape it into a little more of a tree look to them. I'm someone who enjoyed a lot of bonsai stuff when I was first starting my planting career. So I really like this plant because it has that look already. It has a small tree aspect. It gets covered in these really dark little flowers all the time, and they're pretty easy to take care of. I have them right in front of my house on my windy sidewalk kind of planters area. So they are surviving out there. They're doing really well. They don't mind a lot more of that salty air, that blast. They're west facing. They take a lot of sun. Um, and in general, that's what the ceanothus can do. There are lots of varieties. So again, this one is more that mid-range, shrubbier, smaller tree or smaller bush variety. And then there are ground cover ones. So the Yankee points, the caramel creepers, so a lot of the ones that we have in our store, they will cover the ground of your planting area really, really easily. Nice dark leaves, they're a little bit glossier, a little bit bigger, blue flowers again, but they'll spill around, they'll take over an area. You can trim them. They're not I wouldn't say they're invasive. They're not dropping roots and spreading around and outcrowding everything, but they're just going to grow really well and really big. And if you don't want it to get as big, come in and chop it back and take care of it. It's a really nice one to take care of. It's a native. It does super well in all of our soils here in the like Bay Area. So our somewhat sandier soils are somewhat of our like maybe if you are right by the coast or even in like the hills, even with the clayer soils, they do really well here in a lot of our soil. So it's minimal amendment. It's good to fertilize pretty much everything, but they don't need a lot of extra help to get to look pretty good. So if you go around to a lot of our different kinds of parks throughout the Bay Area, you'll find these everywhere. They're widely used. They're really, really beautiful, and they have so many aspects. And like I said, there's the ground cover ones and the bush ones. There's also the tree ones. So if you really want a large plant that is the same kind of plant, it's the Ray Hartmans. They can get nice and large. People even sometimes use them as street trees. So there's so much variety in this genus that I just can't talk. I can't keep. It's hard to not talk about them whenever I bring people into our store. We look at natives, so it's the first one I'll point out. And then let's, I think, come into some of our last plants to talk about today. We have the succulents. So there are quite a lot of succulents out there, of course. And if you want a plant that's going to do well in a sunny spot, and if it's a little bit more drought tolerant, if you want to do well anywhere where you're just like, hey, I need a smaller plant for this area, or hey, I need something that I don't have to water too much, the succulent's the one you want to go to. If you have a lot of sun, it's the one you are probably going to at least fill in some spots. And there's so much variety here. It's a very broad term to just say plant a succulent, but let's talk about a few different options here. Some of our fan favorites are the aloes, aeoniums, and agaves. All of them are these nice little um, bigger leaf, broad colors, lots of flowers come out of them. The aloes are what we think of like aloe vera. If you can use it for medicinal purposes, you can also plant all these different kinds of aloes you can see here that have these beautiful spikes of flowers coming out of them. They really have a nice little sharper aspect to your garden that can flower in the spring and summertime. Very easy to take care of. And like I said, if you want to have that medicinal one, the aloe vera is a great one to plant in your garden. Aeoniums are these these rays of leaves that come out of them. They almost look like big cyclops eyes. They can grow to pretty large aspects. They can be some smaller ones. There's lots of colors for the aeoniums. So if you have some that you're like, oh, I need a bright yellow one and a dark maroon one, you can mix and match them really nicely. And they will actually produce these huge flower stalks every once in a while. So it's a really fun experience to see your aeonium flower where the entire head of it just turns into a huge cone of yellow flowers that all the bees and everything just like go crazy for. So it's a fun experience. And then agaves actually do the same thing where they shoot up huge flower stalks, but they're also a very beautiful strappier leaf plants, kind of like a thinner aloe, and they can really fill a space quite nicely. So great ones to talk about there. And then I really want to mention some of my other favorite ones that just do great for filling a space. The Calandrina grandifolia, the rock purslane, which is this plant right here. We probably see it if you ever drove through the city or through a Sunset Boulevard. They're all in the mediums around here, so they can survive in those harsh between all the cars and all the freeways. They can live in those areas where it's probably getting some irrigation, but lots of sun, lots of wind pressure, everything like that. They spread out quite nicely, and then they shoot up these really beautiful magenta looking little cut flowers. They almost look like little poppies. You get them right now. They're actually starting to bloom about now for another couple of months. There's some of those earlier flowers. You'll see them popping up. A lot of times people will come in looking for the beautiful magenta succulent. And actually, when you sell them the plant, it's a little bit of a confusion because the plant doesn't look too crazy. It's a pretty succulent, but it doesn't have a lot going for it. But when the flowers come out, it's incredible. So it's a really nice one to plant in your area. They spread quite easily. They're very easy to propagate. You can just cut snippings off of them, put them into some soil, put them into some water. You can probably get it to regrow from any kind of cutting that you take from these plants. So it's a plant that you can really fill an area with if you just need a nice one for a good bang for your buck and a good, pretty color from the flowers. And then the Oscularia deltoides, which is a really cool name. I like saying it, but also it's called Lampranthus deltoides. There's two names. I don't know which one's the most correct one at the moment, but they go by those different ones. These are the pink ice plants. And sometimes when you say ice plant to someone, they freak out a little bit because it has been taught to us that ice plant is not great. It is a scary plant, but it is a very broad name. These are not the ones like the ice plants right by the beaches that are pretty invasive and a little bit harsh on the environment. These are ones that just have that name because they're within the family. They are, I think deltoides is talking about the really cool little geometric little shapes to the leaves. I really like how kind of chunky and very amorphous these little like spiky little leaves are, but they're still soft. They're still little succulents. They also have a really nice dark or light blue color, like an icy blue kind of coloration. That's I think probably sometimes where the ice plant comes from. Not exactly sure. But they have a really beautiful spring flower show. So you can see right here, this is right in front of my house again, west facing, right on the sidewalk, gets blasted by winds and cars and everything like that. And it just spills into the sidewalk really nicely. And then every once in a while, probably once or twice a year, you get a huge flower show. The entire thing gets bright pink and magenta coloration all over it. And then once it's done flowering, it does look like a little bit like all the leaves and the flowers kind of die back. You just come in, you trim it back, and it grows back again. It's a quite an easy one to take care of. They mound really easily. They can actually propagate them pretty easily as well if you're someone who likes propagation. I think succulents in general are where you want to play around with because there's a lot there you can do. But these are the two that I find if you're trying to fill a nice spot with something that's easy to take care of, the Calandrina or the Oscularia will do well anywhere within all of our kind of microclimates around the city. And that is really the reason why I chose all these plants that we're talking about throughout all these different slides are, although we talked a lot about the idea that lots of different areas within the city and within the Bay Area and just in general have different microclimates. So you have to be careful about what you choose and where you're choosing your plants. Every plant that I've talked about today can pretty much be planted throughout most of our region, most of our areas. This plants that we bring into our stores, and so it's given that both aspect of choose the right plant for the right area, but also know that there are a wide variety that we all can grow. It's not one here, one there. It's everyone can grow most of the plants that we have. Especially if you come into all of our stores, we'll be happy to tell you about the different kinds of plants that we have that will do well in your garden. Most of them will do really well. If you are going to a garden center that's close by to your house, usually that garden center will have only plants that should really be growing in your area because that's what we want to serve. We want to serve our communities. We want to make sure the plants are growing well in our stores. So of course we bring in plants that do well in our areas. So it's definitely a fun one there. I'm coming to the very end of the main lecture point of my talk. I'm happy if everyone, for everyone who stayed with us and if you're enjoying it. I would love if there's any questions or any comments you'd like to give. We also have some information here just to stay up to date with our slope gardens. Make sure you check out our Instagram and our website. Lots of upcoming events are happening and all that kinds of stuff. And then my content right here is on my Instagram if you're interested as well. But yeah, Jen, do we have anything to talk about today?
Hey, well, that was great. Thank you so much. What a thorough presentation. I did want to, there was a couple questions about the recording, and we will have the recording available by Wednesday of next week. And that'll be on our website and on our YouTube. So with the recordings, you can go back and rewind and screenshot and whatnot. And so those are really helpful. And yeah, feel free to ask your questions if you have them. I did have a couple comments. One thing that I find is helpful is just walking around in your neighborhood and seeing what you like and that what's working for your neighbors in the same exposure. So that's really helpful to just sort of get a little bit of a better sense of what might have a better chance of working in your garden. And it's nice to see it in person too, because I think a lot of times when it can be overwhelming going into the nursery and trying to visualize, certain plants in different locations and stuff. And so if it's like in your neighborhood and you see that your neighbor's successful growing it, I think that that's really helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I think if you're ever taking walks around your neighborhood, if you have, especially if you like dogs and stuff like that, it's one of my
Mhm.
favorite things to just look at the plants around me. This picture right here is actually just in one of the parks here in the city, and you can see in this picture right already, we have ceanothus, we have phlomis, we have different kinds of rhododendrons, and we have different kinds of different I think it's cypresses or junipers. It's just showing that a lot of the area around you is your palette. So you can look at what you
Mhm.
have around your neighborhoods and around your areas that have already been growing there for many years and use that as your guiding point. And really see how they're growing. You're right. Everything looks a little bit different in every spot. So
Mhm.
you gotta try it out. You pick a cool plant that you really like the look of, or you really like the smell of, or something like that, and see how it grows. Try it out. Be okay with trimming it. Be okay with giving it some fertilizer. Check on its watering. Always look at for its bugs. Like there's so many things that are involved in gardening, but the initial choice is one of those things that you have to really think about a little bit before you pick.
Yeah, and I would also say too, another thing that can be helpful, because I always try to, because I know that there's such an intimidation factor sometimes with gardening, and so I try to just make it more accessible. But like another thing that can be helpful if you come into the nursery and you want to get plants, the information that's really helpful to us is if you know how much sun you're getting and if it's in the morning or in the afternoon. And then if you have anything else growing there, if you take like a picture of the location or whatever that hasn't worked or what has worked, just that information alone, a lot of times we can give you some suggestions that will probably work. And so that can sort of hopefully make it a little bit more accessible for you and whatnot. Let's see, I did see a question.
Yeah, I'll go onto the pages,
Oh,
flowers,
is
pictures.
all rosemary plants Can all rosemary plants be used for cooking?
Oh, I think it is. I want to say yes. because I use most of my rosemary. I use lots of different kinds of rosemary for my cooking. I'm not too picky about that. And I know I'm growing it and I know I'm taking care of it and I'm washing it before I use it and all that stuff. Um, I'm sure there is maybe some varieties that are a little bit more on the edges or more obscure that maybe are not, but I think
Not as
everything that we bring
tasty or
into our
something.
store is an edible rosemary variety. You can definitely eat them. That's why it's an amazing plant. I really enjoy having them because
Hmm.
I have 4 or 5 of them of a couple different varieties and I use them all.
Hmm. Um, gardenias. That's a.
That's a
Do
good
we sell
question.
them? Yes, we do sell them.
Gardenias are ones that we bring to
How?
the store.
Right.
We usually have them by our kind of shadier sections. They're a plant that likes a little bit more of a protected area. They make those amazing flowers. I mean, people love a sweet smelling flower, and so a gardenia is really good for that. But it's one of those plants that is on a little bit on the trickier side. You need to be careful with your lighting and your heat. They need a little bit more warmth to actually produce those flowers a little bit better, and they don't want to be scorched. Do you have a little more information about those ones, Jen, in your planting?
Yeah, that I think that that's the type of plant. If it's in its right location, it's really pretty low maintenance and highly productive. It's just finding that spot for it is sometimes challenging. They do like you can in the city you can do they do like heat, right? It's a tropical plant. And so if you put it in a container where you're getting reflected heat from your house, um, sometimes that's helpful in the cooler parts of the city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a kind of fun one. I saw someone asking a little bit more about the plants in these pictures.
Yeah, you got to
And
go around and do
I know
it.
when I brought these up, I thought I could maybe put names in all of them, but
Mhm.
it would kind of take away a little bit from it. But I wanted to at least point out some of the ones I really like that are in a lot of our stores. The one here right on the right side, this nice white flower here is the Cistus ladanifer. There's a lot of different kinds of cistus that we bring into our stores. They're also called the rock roses. Um, and so they are ones that have a pretty good drought tolerant growth to them, some really pretty little papery flowers, usually pinks to whites. I really like this one with this little red little eye on it. Next to it also, I know a lot of people know this plant, but the princess flower is another really big one I could have talked all day about. They grow pretty large. They are nice trees or bushes, beautiful purple flowers. They grow all throughout the city with these fuzzy little leaves. So the princess flower or tubacina is the Latin name for those ones. Um, I know also just pointing over here, everyone kind of knows the pincushion flowers. These are really fun plants that are very drought tolerant. They're the South African, Australian, very, Mediterranean plants, the leucadendrons, leucospermums. That's a leucospermum right here. Grow really nice and big. They're great for our gardens. I can keep on going, but there's some more questions for around other stuff too.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of answering a couple. We just have a couple more minutes, but
Other ones I want to actually talk about
bougainvillea, huh?
what I talked about on this page was if you're looking for trailing plants, look towards the bedding sections of our stores for the lotus. This is this little one
Mm-hmm.
right here, but I really like a lotus plant. I also, these are all plants I was thinking about talking about, and so I just put a slide up
Hmm.
here so with some pictures. But the lotus is also called parrot's beak. It's a really nice little trailing plant that has these really fiery looking little beak-like flowers. So it's a nice one if you want to spill into your like in arrangements or on the sides of your planter boxes that spill out the side of them. And then right above it, this one always trips everyone up because it's a huge plant. It's kind of hard to see exactly in this picture, but it's a very large flower head on it. And it's a Geranium madarensiae. And so these, when I say that, people always think, oh, geraniums are this or that, or pelargoniums. There's lots of different kind of talk around geraniums because it's a pretty wide variety. The name can mean many different things, but the Metarantiae ones are the ones that produce these huge purple flower heads. And every once in a while, someone comes in with a picture of this big purple flower head. And they're like, what is this plant? And it's a geranium and it has these little leaves. And when you buy them in the store, they don't look like very much, but they're a fast grower too. So it's a nice one to bring
Hmm.
out.
Well, this has been great, and I'm super pumped to get in the garden and start planting. I'm gonna go just yeah, I'm Every year I feel like I kind of, change some things up, but keep it interesting. There's a quote I think I heard once about it's nice to change the perspective of my plants every once in a while. Give my plants a different view in the garden. So I like to switch things around and just think about things differently. I really appreciate everything that you had to share. I thought it was a great presentation. Like Taylor said, come into the store. We're here to help. And the more information you can bring, obviously we can try to check as many boxes off with it. We do have a design department. I'm the department manager. So if you did want to have somebody come out to your garden for a consultation, we can set that up. And you can find more information on our website about that. And the next class that we have coming up is edible plant combo. So we're in it. We're in spring. It's starting. It's here. Get
Yeah.
get pumped. Get ready.
I'm ready for it. I'm
Get your
ready to
plants.
bring as many plants in as possible. Like I said, our
Yeah.
stores are looking amazing. Come in and talk to us. We're happy to just walk around with you, talk about some plants. It's always a really fun time. It gives you a good feeling. And sometimes you leave with something that you're really happy about and you get to go plant.
Yeah.
So I know I have some
Yeah.
stuff to go trim and plant today. It's a beautiful, nice day out. So I hope
I
everyone else is
know.
enjoying themselves. And thank you for joining us for the live recording and everyone watching this in the future.